Bonjour à tous, bienvenue. Hi to everyone, good morning. I'm Boris Prou, reporter for Le Devoir, and I'll be moderating this press conference. Joined to us this morning, the Minister of Public Safety, Marco Mendicino. Le ministre va livrer un discours, après quoi nous allons prendre des questions. To the reporters on Zoom, please use the raise hand function at any moment during the press conference or right after the speech are over. Without any further ado, the floor is yours, Mr. Mendicino.
Merci beaucoup. Good morning, everyone. And as we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you today in person with some friends who I'll come to in a moment on the traditional territories of the Algonquin peoples. I want to thank a number of individuals, beginning with those who are here with me today. We have friends and colleagues, MPs Ben Dayan, De Bruzen, and my parliamentary secretary, Pam Demoff, who are all a part of this incredible team. I also just want to thank a number of dedicated advocates with whom we met this morning to talk about the important issue of reducing gun violence and creating safer communities, some of whom are joining us in person today, including representatives from Police se Souviennent, the Danforth Families Group, and of course the Coalition for Gun Control. Your insights and cooperation are so crucial and essential in helping us move forward, and that is including the reason why we are here today. Put simply, today's announcement wouldn't be possible without you. And making our community safer would not be possible without you. So, again, a big thank you for joining us today. We are here today because we believe strongly that Canadians deserve to feel safe in their communities. And that sense of safety is shattered every time a shooting takes place. Gun violence is caused by a number of issues, including organized crime, transborder crime, public health issues, and gender-based violence, which is connected to gun violence, which has gone up some 30% between the years 2013 and 2019. And I want to take a moment in particular to thank those women who have stepped forward in the face of the tragedy and the lived tragic experiences, who continue to advocate for good, smart, policy outcomes to make our communities safer every day. Mes amis, nous sommes ici aujourd'hui parce que nous croyons fermement que les Canadiens méritent de se sentir en sécurité de leur communauté. Over the past 2 years, we have been implementing provisions of Bill C-71, which passed in June 2019. Last summer, new provisions came into force to enhance and expand background checks for those buying a gun. We also implemented new rules around the safe transportation of guns. And now we're here to complete in taking the next and final step in implementing Bill C-71. Today, I'm announcing the implementation of new, sensible, and safer rules around the sale and transfer of firearms. First, effective May 18, individuals and businesses transferring or selling a non-restricted firearm will need to confirm the purchaser's identity and validate that they hold and are still eligible to hold an appropriate firearms license, validate the transferee's license information to the registrar of firearms to avoid fraud and confirm that the license has not been revoked or suspended, and obtain a reference number from the registrar in order to proceed with the acquisition. And this all can be done easily and instantaneously through the Canadian Firearm Programs portal, which is available online 24/7. Aujourd'hui, j'annonce la mise en œuvre des nouvelles règles plus strictes régissant la vente ou la cession d'armes à feu. À compter de 18 mai, les particuliers et les entreprises qui cèdent ou vendent une arme à feu sans restriction devront confirmer l'identité du destinataire et vérifier que son permis d'armes à feu est valide avant de procéder à la cession. Cette vérification peut être obtenue instantanément sur le portail en ligne du Programme canadien des armes à feu 24 heures sur 24. En bref, cette nouvelle règle contribuera à empêcher les personnes qui ne sont pas autorisées à posséder une arme à feu d'en obtenir une. Secondly, firearms businesses will need to keep sales and inventory records for non-restricted firearms, which was the case until 2005. And this will make it easier for law enforcement to investigate and trace gun crime. I want to make clear that the records will be held by businesses, not government, and the police will need reasonable grounds to get access to those records. Deuxièmement, les entreprises d'armes à feu devront tenir des registres de vente et d'inventaire pour les armes à feu sans restriction, comme c'était le cas jusqu'en 2005. Il sera ainsi plus facile pour les forces de l'ordre de tracer les armes à feu. Ces registres seront détenus par les entreprises et non par le gouvernement, et la police devra avoir des motifs raisonnables pour y avoir accès, souvent avec un mandat. Put simply, these new rules will ensure that those people who aren't allowed or shouldn't have access to a gun can't get one, and prevent guns from falling into the wrong hands. These new rules are a central part of our broader, ambitious agenda to fight gun violence and to keep Canadians safe. And it starts in our communities. We're working to stop and to prevent gun crime before it even begins through historic investments in prevention, most importantly, the $250 million Building Safer Communities Fund, which we have already begun to roll out. We're taking action at our borders. Through investments in the CBSA, RCMP, and other law enforcement branches, we're taking aim at traffickers and stopping the illegal trafficking of guns from coming into our country. And indeed, in 2021, just last year, the CBSA had a record year for illegal gun seizures. Assault weapons like AR-15s serve just one purpose, and that's to kill innocent people. They don't belong in Canada, which is why we banned them 2 years ago. Our rules ensure that any new firearms meeting the criteria are automatically prohibited, even if they aren't explicitly listed in the regulations, meaning there are no loopholes. In fact, the original list of 1,500 banned AR-15 and assault-style firearms has now grown to over 1,800 as new firearms are meeting the criteria and thus being banned from Canada. Finally, we will soon implement a mandatory buyback program to get these weapons of war off of our streets for good. Building safer communities, taking action at the border, banning assault weapons, buying them back, addressing the root causes of gun crime are all of the things that we need to do as part of a comprehensive strategy to end gun violence and to make sure that our communities are safe. Ces nombreuses initiatives ont un seul objectif: mettre fin à la violence et assurer la sécurité de nos communautés. Le gouvernement du Canada continuera de respecter ses engagements et d'agir sur la violence armée dans notre pays par le biais de mesures fondées sur des preuves. C'est une question de sécurité. Nous protéger nos proches et protéger nos communautés. Et c'est exactement ce que feront ce règlement et toutes les mesures de notre gouvernement en matière d'armes à feu. The new rules we've just announced will make a meaningful difference, but they're one element of our ambitious agenda that we've just outlined to protect Canadians from gun violence, a public health issue that has claimed far too many lives. One of our strongest beliefs about our efforts is that we can't focus on just one of the pillars of the strategies that I've outlined. We have to be doing all of these things simultaneously. And rather than seeking one magic solution, we're taking a broad and comprehensive approach. Building safer communities, taking border action, and banning all of those firearms that we've already referred to is how we will get there. And I want to thank again everyone for participating this morning, including my amazing colleagues this morning, and I'm happy to take some questions. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Ministre. We will now take some questions. We will start with questions in the room. For those journalists online, on Zoom, please use the raise hand function at this time. So I will hand you the floor later on. We'll start with Jim Brunskill, Canadian Press. You can stay, Jim, at your desk now with the new tables, and I'll leave you the floor.
Good morning, Minister. On the requirement for sellers, vendors to keep records of gun transactions now, will police need a warrant to see those records. In the past, when this was done, police did not need a warrant. Will they do so now?
Well, I want to thank you for the question, Jim. And, it allows me to just highlight that what we're doing this morning is introducing rules that are intended to be smart, sensible, and to promote safer communities by requiring, among other things, that business keep records. And many of the businesses and the vendors that sell firearms already do that, but it was not a requirement. The feedback that we received from many stakeholders is that it was important to have this reflected in the regulations, which is what it does. As you heard me say in my comments, that those records will be kept by the businesses, not the governments. And the purpose of this particular requirement is to ensure that, one, that guns don't get into the wrong hands, and criminal hands in particular, and two, to enable police to follow up and to investigate where they have reasonable grounds to believe that a gun may have gotten into the wrong hands, or it may have been transferred illegally. And so in that instance, they will be able to approach businesses on reasonable grounds to obtain that information, and there may be some instances where they may wish to also use a warrant as a tool to get access to those records. I'll point out a couple things. First, that's a decision that will be undertaken independently by police, again, at their discretion and on the basis of reasonable grounds. And secondly, the utility of allowing police to approach businesses to get access to information to trace illegal gun sales or possession is essential. It was the way in which police were able to find and locate Marc Le Pen, and it is one of the main rationales that continues to inform why it is that we have implemented these new regulations under Bill C-71.
So just to be clear on that, there are cases where police could approach a gun owner, a gun vendor, to obtain sales of a non-restricted gun without a judicial warrant under these new regulations.
On reasonable grounds. And so in plain language, that means they need a good reason, but informed by the evidence and the information that they collect. Yes.
Thank you. Prochaine question, Madeleine Blais-Morin, Radio-Canada.
Bonjour, Monsieur le ministre. Il y a des informations qui ont circulé dans le National Post récemment voulant que votre gouvernement envisageait encore une interdiction nationale des armes de poing. Est-ce que c'est vrai? Et le gouvernement du Québec a récemment dit que la balle était dans le camp d'Ottawa pour interdire les armes de poing. J'aimerais la réponse aux deux questions, s'il vous plaît.
Tout d'abord, j'ai l'occasion, il y a vers un mois, de participer et engager à la forum à la lutte contre la violence causée par les armes de poing à l'invitation de la mairesse Plante. C'est un forum qui m'a touché vraiment aux causes de les témoignages de les jeunesses qui étaient impactées par la violence causée par les armes à feu dans les rues. C'est une question qui est tellement importante, comment on peut agir, prendre plus d'action sur les questions particulières à les armes de poing. Ma collègue, la députée Ben Dayan, travaille en étroite collaboration avec les organismes qui sont ici ce matin sur cet enjeu particulier. Écoute, la préférence de notre gouvernement est de prendre plusieurs des étapes pour une approche qui est cohérente, qui est nationale sur les armes de poing. Dans mon lettre de mandat, le Premier ministre m'a demandé de travailler ensemble avec toutes les provinces et les territoires eux qui veulent introduire un bannir pour les armes de poing à l'opportunité pour coopérer et pour collaborer avec le gouvernement pour introduire des politiques et des lois pour accomplir cette bout importante. Donc, nous sommes en train d'avoir un dialogue qui est constructif pour prendre l'action qui est nécessaire pour adresser cet enjeu.
Et je vous reparle du gouvernement du Québec qui plaide encore ce matin pour faire quelque chose au chemin Roxham en disant que la situation en ce moment est insoutenable. Quels sont vos plans et quand seront-ils exécutés?
Mais écoute, c'est un dossier qui est très important. On collabore toujours avec le gouvernement Legault, particulièrement pendant la pandémie. On avait ajouté les protocoles, les conventions à la semaine Roxham pour protéger tout le monde de le virus. Mais je sais qu'il y a des progrès avec les ressources qu'on avait mettre sur cette particulière point à la frontière. Et aussi, nous sommes en train de négocier avec les États-Unis un nouveau entente pour réguler les bougements des demandeurs d'asile. C'est un processus qui est un part d'une stratégie de défendre les droits des réfugiés, mais en même temps de protéger tout le monde, tout le monde au Québec. Donc, c'est un équilibre, mais c'est très important.
Up next, Kevin Gallagher, CTV.
Morning. I just want to ask, what is the definition that the federal government's going to have of assault weapons? Because that's sort of part of this announcement moving forward, that broader definition or a specific definition. So sort of tell me what that is and how that will be implemented now. Is that added on to the original order in council, or will there have to be new legislation? Can this be done solely through regulation? Let me know.
Well, so currently, as you know, we banned AR-15 style assault rifles in May of 2020. We banned it through an order in council which sets out a number of criteria which are then applied to those firearms which fit within that definition. One of the criteria that the order in council stipulates is the amount of deadly force that the firearm can create, measured in kilojoules. And so over time, what that enables us to do, as I said during my introductory remarks, is to apply it to new deadly firearms which have no business being in our communities. And I want to be abundantly clear about this. The reason we took the step of banning AR-15s is because they were designed for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to kill people. They are designed for theaters of war, not for communities, not for recreational shooting. And this is an important line of demarcation in the approach that we as a Liberal government take and some others in opposition take. And we will always stand up when it comes to protecting our communities from the kind of deadly firearms that have been used Paul-Souvien, in Port-à-Pic, Quebec City mosque shooting, and many other shooting tragedies. And the last thing I'll just say is that, yes, it's important that we take this step, that we remove these firearms from our communities once and for all. But it's not the only thing that we need to do. The feedback that I've been getting from my colleagues, the feedback that I have been getting from women's groups, survivors, those who have been traumatized by gun violence, is that we need to be doing a number of things simultaneously. We also need to be addressing the root causes of gun violence. And in a society where we're seeing an increasing amount of toxicity and rhetoric that is driven by extremist ideology, in a society where not enough young kids have access to affordable housing, to mental health care, to a safe education, we need to be creating safe spaces for them. And that's one of the reasons why I also took the point in my introductory remarks to highlight the $250 million Building Safer Communities Fund. And having already launched it and doing it in partnership with those leaders, those people who live this experience every single day, who don't feel safe when they come out of their house. And I've spoken to those parents. They live in my community. Mothers and fathers who are literally terrified that if their kids go out, that they're going to either, make the wrong choice or be gunned down, is precisely why we're here today. It's to take the next step one of a series of steps that are part of a comprehensive strategy so that we can reduce gun violence once and for all and make our communities safe.
My follow-up, business owners that'll have to basically keep a registry here. There's money to buy back the weapons from owners. Is there any financial support or technical support for business owners that now have to manage this registry?
Well, again, the first thing I just want to be clear about is that this is not a registry. You'll hear from some who will try to characterize it as that. I would point out that when we introduced Bill C-71, there was a conservative amendment that was put forward at committee to add a clause in the bill that said that we would not be introducing a new gun registry. Liberals supported that amendment, and I just want to be abundantly clear that that is not what we are doing today. Point final. Secondly, we are going to be working very closely with law enforcement to be sure that businesses who are now required or will be required effective May 18 to keep records of those transactions understand how these rules work. But I would just repeat that many of these businesses are already doing it already as part of just good best practices or due diligence. I fully appreciate and thank those vendors who are responsible, who sell firearms, do not want to allow their products to be falling into the hands of criminals or people who shouldn't be in lawful possession of firearms. That's why they keep those records. But the reason we are introducing this regulation is because the feedback that we were getting is that it wasn't an obligation, it wasn't mandatory, and in a country where, sadly, we've seen increases in gun crime, some of which is committed by guns which have been stolen or guns which have been purchased through straw purchasing, is one of the main reasons why these new rules will help to reduce that risk and will also allow law enforcement some additional tools to investigate and trace where they've got grounds in cooperation with those vendors of firearms.
David Thurston, CBC.
Hi, Minister. Can you tell us why you're not announcing the gun buyback program today? In other words, why is it taking so long?
What I would say is that today's announcement shows just how important it is that the government is open, is accessible, and is a good listener to all of the partners that are impacted in this space of gun violence. And one of the things that I just really want to emphasize to you and to everyone really is how much I value, and I think we all value in our government, the advice that we're getting from survivors, from women's groups, so that we get these policies right, so that we get them right. And I am as eager and as anxious to take each and every one of these steps in due course. But today is important. Today is important, firstly, because it allows us to take the final step in the full implementation of Bill C-71, which was initially passed in 2019. But my sincere hope is that it also reflects our government's ongoing commitment to those who have been tragically impacted by gun violence, that we are listening. And when it comes to the buyback, we are doing the same thing. We are listening very carefully to a wide array of partners and stakeholders in this space so that when we launch this program, we get it right. And when we make that announcement, and I hope it is in the very near future, it will be the first time that Canada will have introduced a national buyback program for a banned firearm in the form of the AR-15s and assault-style rifles. So we're anxious, we're eager, but we also want to listen and we want to get it right.
So, I mean, have you set, I understand that you're doing the consultations and you want to get that right, you really want to listen. So, but have you set yourself a timeline or a scope or a period of time in which you want to complete those consultations with? Can we see by the end of the year? Can we see maybe by next year you coming here into the National Press Theatre and announcing this buyback program?
I mean, that is absolutely my intent. And, no one should have any doubt about our steadfast commitment to continue to move forward with a real dedication to take these steps as quickly as we can, but as responsibly as we can. And, I am, very much aware of the urgency of this issue. We look at, we all hear the reports. We hear about the statistics and we look at the numbers and we see that gun violence is on the rise. And those statistics are an awful barometer, frankly speaking, about the direction in which we are moving when it comes to gun violence. And we've all got to acknowledge that. At the same time, what today shows is that we are going to continue to bend the arc of this work in the right way by taking meaningful steps when it comes to introducing safer gun laws, by making sure that we put the investments in law enforcement at our borders and in our communities so that we can stop the illegal flow of firearms into our country, and by addressing the root causes, including some of the mental health and public health issues which lead to gun violence through our Building Safer Communities Fund, which is really about partnering intentionally with those who are especially at risk, young people, racialized communities, Indigenous peoples. We have to be listening to them and working with them as we roll out all of these steps, and that is our steadfast commitment.
Your intention is to come back within a year?
I hope as soon as possible. I really do.
We will go on Zoom with Mark Douglas, City.
Hello, can I just confirm everyone can hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you. Minister, very expansive program that you're announcing here, but would you agree, though, that regulations and records for guns and gun sales that you're describing can only do so much and would not actually prevent any smuggling of guns across the border from the U.S.?
Well, as I've said on a couple of occasions, I think today is an important step because it puts into force tools that will ensure that guns don't get into the wrong hands or criminal hands. It builds on previous initiatives under Bill C-71, which includes more robust background checks. There used to be, prior to 2019, a limitation that vendors only had to look back 5 years. We erased that so that now we have to look at the total history of somebody who wants to buy a firearm. Today, what we're doing is we're making sure that as people purchase firearms, that they can establish who they say they are, which is very much connected to the goal of making sure that these sales are lawful and that they don't fall into the wrong hands. And when it comes to business records, I would point out that, as I said earlier, it was the ability of police historically to approach and engage vendors that allowed them to find marque la peine. And it is important that we provide police with the ability to approach and engage vendors on reasonable grounds so that they can obtain the evidence and the information that they need so that they can detect and hopefully prevent gun crime. And as to your specific question around the action that we are taking at the border, I would point out that this government has year over year continued to provide law enforcement with additional investments, additional tools, additional resources, which is why I would say quite encouragingly, CBSA was able to make a record number of arrests and seizures in relationship to illegal gun smuggling last year. We know that there's more work to be done, but again, it's part of a comprehensive strategy that we are taking to address gun violence in this country.
Thank you. And if I may, with a follow-up then, could you walk us through an example of how, of how the regulations and the background checks and the ID checks would have prevented something like, specifically like the Danforth shooting tragedy? What would have been prevented in that situation had everything that you are suggesting today been in effect back then?
Well, I would say a couple of things. First and foremost, in a situation like the Danforth shooting, and I spoke to a number of the families who were traumatized and who survived, that particular mass shooting in my hometown in Toronto, and I would be remiss if I didn't point out how inspired I was by them to continue to be advocates to us and to the government, despite the trauma that they've had to endure, something that they continue to live with to this day. Mothers and fathers, teenagers who knew Reese Fallon and some of the others who were shot at in the Danforth. So this is a very personal issue for them, as it is for members of our government. I mean, MP de Bruzen represents a community in Toronto, which represents the Danforth community in Toronto. So I just cannot emphasize enough that we have been listening very carefully to them. And one of the things that is reflected in today's announcement is that when people go to a vendor to purchase a firearm, that they have to provide additional detail and information about their identification. That is all on the card that they have when they acquire their license, so that vendors can be sure that that there's no reason why they shouldn't be making that sale of a firearm to them. And in a situation where perhaps somebody is trying to circumvent the system or get around the rules through straw purchasing or through fraud, in the absence of these regulations today, you may very much be increasing the risk of there being that next shooting tragedy, which nobody wants. And so I would say that the regulations today build upon the input and the feedback and the advice that we've been getting from survivors. And I hope that they see that that is reflected in the regulation today. But I also want to acknowledge that you are right that not any one of these steps will be a foolproof strategy. We have to be doing all of these things simultaneously. Introducing safer gun laws, making sure that we have safer borders with the additional enforcements and resources for law enforcement, and building safer communities by addressing the root causes of gun crime, which gets right to the core of the systemic challenges, which we, I think, all know and hear about from our respective communities.
Merci. Prochaine question, Jacques Galland, Toronto Star.
Good morning, Minister. I just have one question for you. I'd like to know about the timing of today's announcement. The Conservatives are having their first official debate tonight. They've been critical of some of the rules your government's implemented on firearms. Was today's announcement scheduled today to coincide with that debate?
We made the announcement today because we wanted to take action on gun violence. And as I said earlier, it's important that we move forward by taking all of the steps that are necessary to advance the comprehensive strategy that this government has with regards to gun violence. I will leave it to Conservatives to defend their record and their policies and their strategies or absence thereof when it comes to gun violence. That's not why we're here today. We're here today to mark the next important milestone in addressing gun violence and making our communities safer. And that is precisely what the coming into force of these regulations under Bill C-71 is about.
Thanks. And on the gun buyback program, I heard you say you'd like to see it as soon as possible. I believe in the past you've said you were hoping for this spring, and here we are in the spring. As soon as possible, meaning this year? Is it still this spring? Is it another season this year?
Well, last time I checked, it is still spring, although if you're outside in Ottawa today, it feels more like summer with temperatures a little bit over 30 degrees. But look, we know that there is a real desire and urgency to move forward with the buyback program. We know that it's important that we continue to engage and listen to partners in this space so that we get the buyback program right. It will be a watershed moment for this country because we've never had a buyback program in effect, and so we want to take that step as quickly as we possibly can, and we are going to take those steps. And as soon as we have more news on that, you will be among the first to hear about it.
Thank you. Now, Daniel Frieder from the Caliber magazine.
Hi there, Minister. Thank you. First off, just a quick thing about Mark Lapine. You keep referencing that he was apprehended by a gun registry, but he shot himself at the scene of the murder there at Polytechnic. Can you explain how the gun registry was assisting in that?
Well, again, from those who were at Poly-Souvienne, and there are some who are here today and some whom I spoke with, words cannot do justice to what they have had to endure, not only in the shooting itself at Polytechnique, but the courage, the bravery, and the persistence that they have shown in the years and now decades since is remarkable and inspiring. And the experiences and the advice that they have shared and that we have heard from many different partners is that allowing the police to engage with businesses who sell firearms on reasonable grounds will help to trace and investigate crime that is related to gun violence. It's a sensible tool. It's a tool it's a tool that has existed, but is now going to be codified in the implementation of these regulations. And it's one that is also prudent because it ensures transparency and accountability. So we are very grateful to those who have advocated for this particular regulation, and we're happy to be bringing it into force today.
Okay, well, that doesn't answer the question, but we'll move on anyways. In 2014, when all the guns that you have since banned, these semi-automatic sporting rifles that are not actually, in fact, issued to any military around the world, were still legal in Canada, the violent crime index was about 70.7%. Now, after 7 years of Liberal government and Liberal gun control policy enactments, it's over 90%. How do you explain that?
Well, as I pointed out, we're all alarmed and very concerned about the rise in gun violence, which is why we are advancing a comprehensive strategy to reduce that violence. And for us, it requires a number of things, including introducing safer, sensible rules around the sale and transaction of firearms, which is precisely what today's announcement is about. It's about making sure that as people enter into a transaction to obtain a firearm, that there's good due diligence that ensures that guns don't get into the hands of wrong people. Again, common sense. And a practice that is already being carried out by many vendors, but was previously not codified. But these steps that we're taking under the law are not the only thing that we need to be doing. We also need to be supporting law enforcement, and that is something that this government has a very solid track record of doing, with additional investments at the border, with additional investments in our various funds and envelopes to fight guns and gang violence domestically within our communities, and finally building safer communities in partnering with those individuals who are particularly at risk to address the root causes, including mental health issues that lead to gun violence. It's the suite of these measures being advanced at the same time that will help us to get those numbers down. We firmly believe that, and that's why today's announcement is so important.
On me dit que c'est tout le temps que nous avons avec le ministre. I'm being told that it's all the time we have with the minister. So thank you very much. That puts an end to this press conference.
Merci beaucoup tout le monde.